At my own birthday party, my dad stood up, tapped his glass with a knife like he was about to propose a toast, and told a room full of family, friends, and neighbors, "Your brother's the only one who'll make us proud." I just smiled, nodded like it was a compliment, and kept cutting cake with this dull plastic knife that felt like it might snap in half from how tight I was gripping it. I heard some scattered laughter, a few awkward chuckles from the people who didn't know if it was a joke or not, and one loud cough from my Uncle Ron, who was already on his third beer before dinner. I think what made it worse was how normal it felt. Like I wasn't even surprised. It wasn't the first time he said something like that, and God knows it probably wouldn't be the last. My mom just pursed her lips like she does when she doesn't agree with him, but also isn't willing to say anything out loud. She adjusted the candles on the cake, like that was somehow going to fix the moment, like crooked flames were the real problem. My brother, Evan, he didn't even flinch. He just smiled, shook a few more hands, and took over the conversation like the whole thing was a planned segue into his promotion. And yeah, he got promoted. Again. Regional VP of something in some sleek, clean office where people have espresso machines and 30-minute meetings about synergy and upward trends. He came in late to the party, wearing that smug suit he probably had tailored in Italy or wherever he was last week. Gave me this heavy pat on the back and said, "Still doing the landscaping gig, huh?" Like I was still 12, mowing lawns for allowance. Like running a small business with 2 guys on payroll and 15 weekly clients wasn't respectable unless it came with a key card and dental. The thing is, I used to care. I used to get mad. I'd go for these long drives after family events, blasting music just to drown out that tightness in my chest that came from not measuring up. But lately, it just feels like background noise. I don't even get angry anymore. Just kind of dull. Numb. I've gotten so good at pretending I don't give a damn, sometimes I convince myself I really don't. So I helped serve cake. I took the corner piece with the most frosting for the kid from next door. I poured soda for my cousin's twins who kept sticking their fingers in the ice bucket. I even laughed when Evan made some joke about how Jack's real gift is hospitality. And no one said a word. Not even my best friend Tony, who's known me since 7th grade and once punched a guy for calling me useless in a parking lot. I think everyone's just tired of pretending like our family isn't a sitcom without the laugh track. Later that night, after most people left and the only ones still hanging around were my Aunt Vicky, who was giving her yearly "You Deserve Better" monologue, and Evan, who was half drunk and polishing off Dad's scotch, I got a text. It was from Evan, sent at 11:42 p.m., while he was probably standing 5 feet away from me. It said, "Check the gift bag in the den." I went and found this sleek black bag sitting by the fireplace, tucked between the armchair and the TV stand. Inside was a picture frame. At first, I thought it was a photo of the 4 of us, Mom, Dad, Evan, and me, from one of those forced family Christmas mornings where we all wore flannel and pretended we liked each other. But when I pulled the frame out, I saw it was edited. I was cropped out. Neatly, surgically. It was just the 3 of them sitting on the couch, all smiling. There was a sticky note on the back that read, "Some pictures look better this way." I stood there holding it like it was made of lead. Not angry, not sad, just hollow. And maybe that's the worst part. Feeling nothing when someone tries to cut you out of your own life. I put the frame back in the bag, carried it outside, and slid it into the trash can under the half-empty birthday decorations. I didn't say anything to Evan. I didn't even look at him as I passed him in the hallway. Just went to bed and stared at the ceiling for an hour, listening to my parents argue about whether or not I seemed off lately. A week later, I got another text from Evan. This one came out of nowhere, just as I was finishing up work at a client's place, scraping moss off a stone path behind their pool house. It said, "What did you say to Dad? He's been locked in his room all day." That was it. No hey, no context. Just straight to the point. I wiped my hands on my jeans, stared at the message for a full minute, then locked my phone and got back to work. I didn't respond. Because I hadn't said a damn thing. Not a word. Not that night. Not since. And somehow, that silence had done more damage than 1,000 arguments ever could. The funny thing about growing up with someone like Evan is that you start mistaking your own failures for facts of life, like gravity or taxes, just these unavoidable constants you don't question anymore. Because no one's gonna give you the benefit of the doubt when your brother's out here winning everything short of a Nobel Prize before 35. By the time we were both in high school, it was already obvious to everyone that Evan was the golden boy, the star pupil, the homecoming king. The kid who got straight A's without studying and still had time to run varsity track and tutor kids for community service hours, which he made sound like a hobby instead of an obligation. Me? I was the kid in the principal's office more often than I was in class, not because I was dumb or bad, but because I'd stopped trying so early that no one even remembered what trying looked like on me. My guidance counselor once told me, and I swear she said this like she thought it was helpful, that maybe I was more suited to working with my hands, like that wasn't just code for don't bother applying to college. Evan, meanwhile, got early admission letters, internships at places with offices that had glass walls, and a full ride to a private university that wouldn't have even opened my application unless I attached a check. But here's the part no one knows, not even my closest friends. Evan wasn't perfect. Not even close. Behind that golden exterior, behind all the clean-cut smiles and Instagram-friendly vacations, Evan was cheating, not on tests, not on girlfriends, but on life itself. And I was the idiot who helped him do it. It started small, like everything does. Junior year, he came to me in a panic because he had to turn in a major chemistry paper, and he hadn't even started it. Said he was swamped with AP everything and the debate tournament in Boston, and could I just help him out this once? I didn't even blink. I wrote the paper in one night while he went to some dinner with the school board, and he turned it in with his name on it. Got an A. I got a soda and a nod of thanks like I was the guy who held open a door, not the one who just got him a pass on academic fraud. Then it happened again. And again. I wrote essays, lab reports, even answered his online quizzes when he gave me his password. And each time, I told myself I was just helping. Just covering for my brother, like any good sibling would. But deep down, I knew. I knew I was part of a lie, and I knew it didn't matter because no one was ever going to believe that Evan, sweet, charming, straight-edge Evan, would ever need someone else to do his work. And no one was ever going to give me credit for anything except maybe knowing how to fix a leaky sink or mow in straight lines. The resentment didn't come all at once. It showed up slowly, like water damage, spreading behind the walls of our relationship until everything looked fine on the outside, but was rotting underneath. It got worse in college. Evan's tuition, supposedly covered by merit scholarships, was being quietly topped off by money from our parents, money that was meant for both of us, but never made its way to my account. I found that out by accident, years later, when I was helping Mom clean out the attic and found a stack of financial records she thought she'd shredded. There it was, black and white, transfers, payments, cover-ups, all of it. I remember standing there with this brittle piece of paper in my hand, realizing that even when I was out of the picture, even when I'd stopped asking for help, they were still investing in him like he was a stock they couldn't let crash. And maybe the worst part, the part one still think about on quiet nights when there's nothing left to distract me, is that I never told anyone. Not even Tony. I just took it. I swallowed the injustice like it was medicine, bitter and thick and supposedly good for me in the long run. Because if I said something, I wasn't just throwing Evan under the bus. I was torching what little respect my parents had left for me, and I wasn't sure I had the guts to do it. But now? Now I think about it every time I see that framed photo in our living room with Evan's face right in the center and mine fading into the background. I think about it every time someone calls me the quiet one or the dependable one, like silence and reliability are the same thing as invisibility. And I think about it every damn time I hear someone say, "You and your brother couldn't be more different." They're right. We couldn't. Because Evan got away with everything and I made sure of it. And now, after all these years, I'm not angry. I'm not even bitter. I'm just done. So when Evan texted me out of the blue the night after Dad locked himself in his room, asking, "What did you say to him?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't have to say a thing. My silence had finally done something his words never could. And that silence, it's just getting started. I hadn't planned on finding it, if I'm being honest, and it wasn't like I was searching through old boxes with some dramatic intent to uncover lost secrets or expose anyone. It just happened, like most of the important stuff in life does, by accident and in silence. I was in the garage, looking for a socket wrench to fix a jammed blade on my mower when I knocked over one of Dad's old filing cabinets, the kind with stiff drawers and yellowed labels like Taxes 2003 and Warranties, Do Not Toss. The whole thing hit the concrete with a sound that echoed in my chest, and out spilled papers, receipts, and a single, unassuming envelope with my name on it in Dad's handwriting. Just Jack, no to my son or anything warm like that, just Jack. Sharp and plain like a label slapped on a drawer. The envelope wasn't sealed, and it didn't feel new. It had been opened, maybe years ago, maybe recently, but the edges were soft, worn like it had been read a few times. Inside were 3 sheets of folded paper, one of them printed, the other 2 handwritten. The printed one was from the university Evan went to, a bursar statement from almost 15 years ago showing a correction to a payment. A scholarship had been revoked, apparently because of an anonymous tip, and instead of letting the school drop Evan or ask questions, Dad had stepped in and covered the whole thing from a private account. No questions, no comments, just money, straight from an education contingency fund that I never knew existed. The second sheet was a bank statement, and this one hit harder than I expected. It was dated from the same month I dropped out of community college after my second semester. I'd told my parents the classes were boring, that I was better off getting real experience instead of sitting through lectures about supply chains and business models I'd never use. But the truth was uglier and quieter. I couldn't afford the books. I'd asked Dad just once if he could help me out. He said money was tight and that if I really wanted something, I'd figure it out. That same month, he wired $7,000 to Evan for unexpected housing costs. The memo line on the statement read Priority E. I sat there on the concrete, holding that paper like it was radioactive, and I swear I didn't feel anger. Not immediately. What I felt was small, like all the air had been let out of the version of my life I thought was real. Because even though I'd always suspected it, the favoritism, the lies, the silent betrayals, seeing it laid out in dollar signs and signatures made it undeniable. Made it permanent. The last page was a note, handwritten in Dad's stiff cursive, with words that looked like they'd been pressed into the paper too hard. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It just said, "He doesn't deserve it. I can prove it. But I won't." That was it. Just those 3 lines. Nothing else. No date. No explanation. I didn't know if he was talking about me or Evan, and that made it worse, like reading a verdict without knowing which crime they're convicting you for. I folded the note back up, slid it into the envelope, and sat in the garage until the light through the small window turned orange and heavy. Later that night, I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't call Evan. I didn't even look at my parents during dinner. I just watched Dad push peas around his plate like a man who'd lost his appetite for more than just food. The silence at the table stretched long and wide, and for once, it wasn't mine alone. My mom tried to talk about the weather, about the new neighbors who had a dog that barked too much, but no one really listened. Dad didn't say a word. Not to her, not to me. I took the envelope and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket, the one I never use, the one that still had an old receipt from a movie I saw alone 3 years ago. It felt weird, walking around with it in my coat, like carrying evidence of a crime no one would ever prosecute. But I didn't want to hide it again. Not in the garage. Not in a drawer. I wanted it close, like a fuse that hadn't been lit yet, but could be any second, if I just reached for the match. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about that one line, "He doesn't deserve it." I can prove it. Over and over, like a riddle, like a threat. Was it about me? Was it something Evan said to him once, back when I was still trying to catch up and falling short every damn time? Or was it Dad finally cracking, finally realizing that the son he bet on wasn't the one who stood beside him after every lie? The truth is, I didn't know. But I knew it mattered. I knew it mattered enough that when I left for work the next morning, I stopped by Dad's office on my way out and left the envelope on his desk. No note, no comment, no explanation. I didn't wait to see if he found it. I didn't want to watch him read it. I just left it there, neatly placed next to his calendar, and a picture of Evan at graduation, as if that piece of paper might finally compete with the frame. And as I closed the office door behind me, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't scared anymore. Not of him. Not of what he thought. Not even of what would happen next. Because whatever came, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. The thing about people like my dad is that they don't really see you unless you're doing something that fits their idea of success. And even then, they're not seeing you, not the actual you. Just the version of you they can brag about to their golf buddies or slip into casual conversation with the guy at the hardware store. So when I left the envelope on his desk that morning, I didn't expect a reaction, not right away at least, and definitely not anything dramatic. He wasn't the kind of man to burst into tears or throw things or come pounding on my bedroom door for answers. No, Charles Foster, the man, the myth, the walking bottle of suppressed emotions, would do what he's always done when confronted with something he can't control, shut down and pretend nothing happened. But by the next afternoon, Mom was already dropping hints that something was off. I came home early from a landscaping job. It started raining halfway through a patio installation, and the homeowner told us to pack it up, and the first thing I noticed was that the house was too quiet. No TV on in the background, no classical music drifting from Dad's study, no sounds of her moving around the kitchen like usual. Just stillness. When I walked into the kitchen, she was standing there by the sink, holding a dish she hadn't rinsed yet, just kind of, staring out the window like she was waiting for something to happen outside. "He's not feeling well," she said, before I even asked. Her voice was low, too casual, like she was rehearsing a line and trying to make it sound normal. "Your father's been in his office since yesterday morning. Didn't even come down for dinner last night." I nodded, didn't say anything, just opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water I didn't really want. I could feel her watching me, waiting for a response, something, maybe guilt, maybe worry, maybe the urge to fix things like I always used to. But I didn't give her anything, not because I was trying to be cold, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. What do you say to a woman who spent her whole life protecting the illusion that her family was fine when it clearly wasn't? "Did you two have a fight or something?" she asked, like she didn't already suspect something deeper, like she wasn't fishing for the thing she was afraid to name. I shrugged and told her the truth, plain and simple. We didn't talk at all. Then I walked past her and went to my room, where I sat on the bed, staring at the same ceiling I used to count cracks in when I was a teenager, trying to ignore the sound of my parents arguing through the walls. I didn't see him the rest of the day. His office door stayed shut, the light under it stayed on, and at one point I passed by and heard nothing, no typing, no papers rustling, no movement. Just the hum of the old desk lamp and a silence that felt heavier than any argument we could have had. That night, Evan called. I didn't answer, so he texted instead. Just one line, "What did you say to Dad?" "He's not eating. I'm coming home." Now, that was interesting, not the part where Evan was worried, but the part where he assumed I said something. As if the idea of me not speaking was somehow more dangerous than me yelling. As if silence from me had more weight now than all the years I spent defending myself, just trying to be heard over the sound of his endless success. I looked at the text for a long time before finally replying. I didn't say anything. "Ask him." 2 hours later, Mom knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to join her for dinner. I told her I wasn't hungry, which was only half a lie. I went out to the backyard instead and sat on the deck, listening to the wind move through the trees like it had secrets of its own. I could see the light in Dad's office from where I sat, still on, still unmoving. And in that moment, I realized something strange. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted the truth to hang there, between us, undeniable and heavy and whole. Evan showed up the next morning, suit jacket slung over his shoulder like he'd just walked out of a boardroom, even though he clearly came straight from the airport. His jaw was tight, his eyes bloodshot, but he still gave Mom a kiss on the cheek and said all the right things. Sorry I didn't call sooner. Had to rearrange a meeting. I'll talk to him. Don't worry, like he was still the fixer. Still the one who handled things when emotions got too messy for the rest of us. He didn't come to me right away. Instead, he went straight upstairs, knocked once on Dad's door, and let himself in. I don't know what they said. I didn't listen in. I just waited, because something told me whatever conversation they were about to have would be the first real one in years. And part of me hoped, truly hoped, that maybe it would break something open, something that needed breaking. But when Evan came back down an hour later, he didn't say a word. Just walked past me in the hallway, didn't even make eye contact, and disappeared into the guest room like a ghost. That night, I stood outside Dad's office door for a long time. I didn't knock. I didn't go in. I just stood there, listening to the silence on the other side, wondering if maybe, just maybe, silence really was the loudest thing in this house. And if it was, then finally, after all these years, it was my voice echoing loudest. Evan always had this way of walking into a room like he owned the air inside it, like people should rearrange themselves to make space for his presence, and honestly, most of the time, they did. Teachers leaned forward when he spoke. Bosses found reasons to promote him early, and even strangers seemed to listen more closely when he opened his mouth, like they expected something worth hearing. I used to envy it, that natural command he carried around like an invisible trophy, but lately it just looked heavy, like a crown too tight for the head it sat on. After that first night back home, he didn't say anything to me, which wasn't out of character, but still told me everything I needed to know, that he was rattled. That whatever Dad had said or didn't say behind that locked door was enough to knock the wind out of his usual confidence. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, one for him and one for me, sitting untouched on the counter like an invitation he didn't know how to deliver. I walked past it, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the sink without a word. He finally spoke, his voice lower than usual, a little flat, like it had lost its shine. "You're proud of yourself, huh?" he said, not really asking. I didn't answer right away because the question was a trap, one of those things people say when they're trying to get a reaction, not an answer. So I waited a few beats, long enough to make it clear I wasn't going to bite, then said, "Did he tell you what I said?" Evan looked at me like I'd just cracked a riddle he was still working on, and when he finally replied, his voice had that familiar edge, like he was trying to cut through fog. No, that's the thing. He didn't say anything, just sat there, staring at the wall, like he was somewhere else entirely. I nodded, slow and deliberate, then took a sip of my water. "Then I guess we're both in the dark." He laughed at that, a short, humorless sound that had nothing funny behind it. "Cut the crap, Jack," he said, stepping closer, trying to fill the space with that old Evan energy, the kind that used to shut me down before I even knew I was in an argument. "You left something for him. I don't know what was in it, but I know you. You don't light a fire without a reason." Now, here's the part where I could have said 1,000 things, where I could have told him about the bank statements and the letter and the bursar notice and the years of quiet, crawling resentment that I'd wrapped up and dropped like a bomb on Dad's desk. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't used in years, and said, "You ever think maybe he lit the fire himself?" Evan didn't respond, not right away, and that pause told me more than any argument could have. Because for once, he didn't have a comeback. He didn't have a defense. He just stood there, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, looking at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. And in that moment, I knew I'd shifted something fundamental between us, cracked the foundation we'd been standing on since we were kids. Later that day, I was in the garage again, trying to reorganize some tools that had gotten scattered during the last job, when I heard footsteps behind me. Evan. Hands in his pockets, watching me like I was a stranger living in his house. "You've always resented me," he said, and it wasn't an accusation. It sounded more like a confession. "I used to think it was jealousy, but now I think it's something worse." I turned, wiped my hands on a rag, and asked, "Worse how?" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the floor, then back to mine. "You don't want what I have. You never did. You just wanted us to see you. Really see you." That stung more than I expected it to, maybe because it was true, maybe because hearing it from him, the golden boy, the one who always got the attention without having to ask, made it feel more real. I nodded, just once, then turned back to the bench. "Took you long enough." He stayed there a few more seconds, like he wanted to say more, maybe even apologize, but whatever words were floating around in his head, he swallowed them like he always did when the conversation turned too personal. I didn't chase it. I didn't need an apology. I just needed him to know that I wasn't playing the same role anymore. That night, while the house slept, I opened my laptop, something I hadn't done in weeks, and pulled up an old folder labeled voice notes. Inside were dozens of small audio clips I'd recorded over the years, not because I thought they'd be useful, but because sometimes speaking into a microphone felt like the only way I could talk without being interrupted. I found the one from 2 years ago, Christmas morning, when Evan was giving another speech at the table about his firm's latest success, and Dad clinked his glass to toast him. In the background, barely audible over the laughter, was Dad's voice, low, slurred from wine, muttering, "Thank God one of them turned out right." I isolated that clip, cleaned up the noise, and trimmed it down to 5 seconds. Then I sent it to Evan's phone with no context, no caption, no warning. He responded with 3 dots, typing, pausing, then gone. He didn't say anything else that night. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need him to. There's something strange about the way mothers can ignore what's right in front of them when it threatens the balance of the image they've been clinging to for decades, as if looking away from the cracks in the wall can somehow keep the whole house from collapsing, even when the foundation's been rotting for years. My mom wasn't cruel, not like my dad could be with his sharp words dressed as jokes or those long, stony silences he used like weapons, but she was complicit in her own quiet way, always smoothing over the damage, always redirecting the spotlight to something more pleasant, like weather reports or Evan's latest award. So, when she finally came into my room that night, after dinner had gone untouched on Dad's plate and Evan had disappeared somewhere into the city again, probably to take a walk or scream into the leather seats of his rental car, I knew something had shifted. She didn't knock, just opened the door and stood there, arms crossed in front of her like a shield, her face unreadable but pale in that way that only comes after too many hours of pretending everything's fine. "I want to know what you gave your father," she said, her voice soft but not gentle, like the calm before a storm or maybe the eye of one that already hit. I didn't move from the edge of the bed where I was sitting, just looked up at her and blinked slowly, giving her the kind of silence she'd trained me into since I was a kid, the one that made things easier for everyone except me. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and walked over until she was standing in front of me, close enough to see the tension in her jaw, the tiny twitch under her left eye that always showed up when she was on the edge of losing control. "You don't get to blow this family up just because you feel like no one ever looked at you enough," she snapped, and the words hit me harder than anything Dad had ever said. Because coming from her, the one person I thought might at least understand, it felt like betrayal dipped in a coat of polished civility. I stood up slowly, not aggressive, not angry, just tall. I met her eyes, and for once I didn't flinch or look away. "I didn't blow anything up," I said, my voice steady, lower than I expected. "I just stopped holding the walls up by myself." She slapped me. Not hard, not cinematic, not like in movies where the sound echoes across the room, just a sharp, sudden movement that caught me off guard and left a stinging warmth on the side of my face. It was the first time she'd ever laid a hand on me, and even she looked surprised by it, like her body had betrayed her before her mind could catch up. But what surprised her more was that I laughed, short, bitter, almost amused. That laugh wasn't about the slap. It was about everything that came before it, all the years I sat through silent dinners, fake smiles, and family photos where I stood just slightly off-center like an afterthought. It was about the way she used to say, "Evan needs your support," like I was supposed to play stage crew for his life while mine flickered in the background with no audience. "You want to know what I gave him?" I asked, my voice still calm, still steady. I walked over to my desk drawer, pulled out a second envelope, not the original one, but something I had prepared a few days ago, when I realized this whole thing was heading for a moment like this. "Read this when you're alone," I said, handing it to her. "Not because I don't trust you. Because I want you to sit with it." "Really sit." She took it with shaking hands, eyes flicking down at the plain white paper like it might burn her. I walked past her and out of the room before she could ask another question, before she could try to rewrite the moment into something more palatable. I needed her to read it without my face nearby, without a target for the guilt or the denial that would come pouring out the moment she realized what she'd allowed to happen all these years. In the envelope was a letter, one I wrote in the dead quiet of the garage at 2 in the morning, while rain hit the roof in slow, rhythmic taps. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even accusatory. It was a story, the one she never saw because she was always too busy looking the other way. I told her about the tutoring, the essays, the financial aid that disappeared, the birthdays she skipped to help Evan shop for internships, the way she always handed me Evan's leftovers like they were favors. I told her I forgave her not because she deserved it, but because I needed to, and that I was done shrinking to make space for other people's comfort. I didn't see her for the rest of the night. No footsteps down the hall, no door creaks, no sobbing through the thin drywall. Just silence. The same kind that had filled this house for years, but this time it felt different. Heavier. More honest. The next morning, she made breakfast, eggs, toast, bacon, the works like nothing had happened, but her hands shook when she passed me my plate, and she didn't look me in the eyes. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter, opened and worn at the edges, like she'd read it more than once. And maybe, just maybe, she finally saw me not the version she wanted, not the version that made the Christmas cards look good, but the real me. The one who'd been here all along, waiting. The letter wasn't written for drama, and it wasn't meant to be a threat or some final blow in a long, silent war. It was written for clarity, for the sake of saying things I should have said years ago but didn't, because I was too busy trying to keep the peace, too busy pretending that if I didn't stir the water, maybe it wouldn't drown me. I didn't expect her to read it twice, but I saw the way the paper had new creases, how it lay on the counter like it had been handled more than once, opened and closed like a wound still trying to decide if it should heal or get infected. There was a part in that letter where I told her, straight out, that I used to wait for her to notice me, not just when I got a good grade or won something small like a school art contest or built a birdhouse for shop class, but when I was just there, existing quietly, hoping she'd look up from whatever Evan needed that day and remember she had 2 sons, not one. I wrote about the time I fell off my bike when I was 10 and cracked my chin open and she rushed me to the ER, not because I was bleeding, but because Evan was supposed to be in a recital that night and she didn't want to be late. I wrote about the way she used to kiss Evan goodnight like it was a ritual, a blessing, while mine were quick pecks or nothing at all if she was already tired. I told her I remembered everything she thought I was too quiet to notice, the way she used to say, "He's just more sensitive," when Evan sulked over a bad grade, but told me to toughen up when I cried over losing my first pet. The way she used to light up when Evan walked into the room like he was carrying sunlight in his pockets, but barely blinked when I spoke unless I was echoing something she already agreed with. I told her none of it made her evil. It just made her human. A mother who loved one son out loud and the other in whispers, assuming that love was enough if it was implied. And then, at the very end, I wrote the sentence that had been sitting at the back of my throat since the day Evan sent that text about Dad being locked in his room. I told her the truth, not just the surface truth, but the kind that tastes like metal and regret. I told her I hadn't said anything to Dad at the party. Not one word. I served cake, I smiled, I cleaned up after the guests like a host, not a son who'd just been publicly disowned. I didn't confront him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even meet his eyes. What I did, the only thing I did, was leave that envelope on his desk with the paperwork, the bursar letter, and his own damn handwriting on the back of a torn check stub, the one that said Jack'll never know. Just keep him quiet. I didn't even include a note. I just left it there, middle of his desk, perfectly centered between the photo of Evan's law school graduation and that stupid brass paperweight he used to say symbolized balance. Because that's all it took. One silent act. One moment where I chose not to perform the role they gave me. I didn't tell him he was wrong. I didn't ask him to explain himself. I didn't try to make him see me. I just handed him the mirror and walked away. It turns out that silence, real, absolute, I don't care anymore silence, is the one thing my father never knew how to handle. He knew how to argue, how to scold, how to debate and belittle and win. But he didn't know how to fight someone who'd put down their sword and walked off the battlefield. Mom never asked me to explain that line in the letter. The one about the silence. But for the next few days, she moved around the house like someone living inside an echo, as if she was hearing things for the first time that had always been there, but muted by her own unwillingness to listen. I caught her in the hallway one afternoon, just standing outside Dad's office with her hand resting on the doorknob like it might burn her if she turned it. She didn't notice me at first, and when she did, she didn't say anything. Just lowered her eyes and walked away. Later that evening, Evan came back from wherever he'd gone, probably not work, probably not a hotel, but somewhere clean and expensive where he could gather his thoughts and pretend for a while that none of this was his fault. He came into my room without knocking, which was just like him, and stood there by the door holding his phone in one hand like it was a weapon. Mom showed me the letter, he said. Flat voice, stiff jaw. You could have told me what was going on. I didn't even look up from the book I wasn't really reading. You would have spun it. Said it wasn't that bad. Said Dad was just trying to help. Maybe he was, Evan said, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the cracks forming around a truth he wasn't ready to say out loud. Maybe he thought protecting me meant sacrificing a few things. Like me? I asked. Still calm. Still quiet. He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because for the first time, he knew what I meant. I didn't need the last word. I didn't need an apology. I just needed him to feel the weight of everything I'd carried for so long. And now, standing in that doorway, holding his phone like a lifeline, he looked more lost than I'd ever seen him. Before he left, he turned and asked, "What do you want from all this?" And I said the only thing that mattered. Nothing. Because peace doesn't come when someone else gives you closure. It comes when you stop needing it. The last morning I spent in that house was quiet in the way that only a place filled with exhausted people can be, not peaceful exactly, but more like the hush that follows a storm when the furniture's still wet and nothing's where it should be. But no one has the energy to start fixing it. I woke up early without meaning to. The kind of early that comes from a brain that refuses to rest even when the body begs for it, and I found myself sitting on the edge of my old bed, looking at the walls I once covered in posters and paint, now stripped back to beige like I'd never really lived there. Outside, the sky was gray but not angry, and I could hear the distant hum of someone mowing a lawn on the next block over, someone like me. Someone who probably didn't know how much that sound carried into rooms where people were deciding whether to stay quiet or finally say the thing they'd been holding in too long. I walked downstairs and didn't bother with breakfast. The kitchen was clean, Too clean, like Mom had scrubbed it at midnight just to keep her hands busy, and the envelope I had seen on the counter before, the one with the letter, was gone. She'd either buried it in a drawer or burned it in the fireplace, and both options felt exactly right. I didn't expect a goodbye from Dad. I hadn't seen him in 2 days, not since the envelope, and I just knew, that whatever was happening behind that closed door was his way of reconciling things the only way he knew how, alone in silence, with the weight of his own choices pressing into his chest like a brick. The door was still locked. The hallway outside it smelled stale, like breath held too long, and for a second I almost knocked, just to hear his voice one more time, to see if there was still something there between us worth acknowledging. But I didn't, because it wouldn't have been for me. It would have been for him. And I was done giving away pieces of myself so someone else could sleep better. I had one bag, not even packed, really, just stuffed with the few things I still cared about, and I slung it over my shoulder and walked to the front door. Evan was sitting on the steps outside, wearing a hoodie instead of his usual iron shirts, his elbows resting on his knees like a kid waiting for punishment. He didn't look up right away when I stepped out, just exhaled long and low like he'd been holding something in for hours. "You leaving?" he asked, like maybe I'd change my mind if he said it out loud. I nodded. "Yeah, think it's time." He scratched the back of his neck like he wanted to say something smart, but didn't know how to make it land. "You could stay, you know. It's your house, too." "No," I said, and it came out gentler than I expected. "It never really was." He nodded like he understood, though I'm not sure he did. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Either way, I didn't need him to get it. I was past needing that. We sat there for a few minutes in silence, watching a neighbor walk their dog past the front yard, where I'd spent so many weekends trimming hedges and raking leaves just to stay busy, just to feel useful. The dog stopped and sniffed something in the grass while the owner tugged gently on the leash, oblivious to the 2 brothers on the steps who had stopped being children in that house long before they were legally adults. Just as I was about to stand up and walk away, Evan turned to me and said something that stuck. "I found the video," he said. "From the party. The birthday." I turned, caught off guard. "What video?" "Mom recorded part of it. Just on her phone. One of those clips she sends to relatives so they know we're all still alive. And in the background, after Dad made that comment, you leaned in. You said something to him." I frowned, genuinely confused. "No, I didn't. I didn't say anything." "You did," he said. Barely audible. "But it's there." Right after he says the thing about me making them proud. You lean in and you whisper something. I listened to it 10 times. I can't make it out. I stared at him, trying to remember the moment, trying to replay the scene in my mind like a movie I'd watched too many times. But it was blank. I remembered the plate, the knife, the frosting, the way the room fell into that weird hush after the words landed. But I didn't remember saying anything. "Maybe I did," I said finally. "I don't know." He looked at me with this odd mix of curiosity and dread. "What did you say to him?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, maybe. Or maybe I just didn't want to. Because what I said, if I said anything at all, wasn't the thing that changed him. It was the years before it, the weight of everything he'd ignored, the sudden realization that the son he'd dismissed might have been carrying the real truth all along. I stood, tightened my grip on the strap of my bag, and looked out toward the sidewalk. Then I looked back at Evan and gave him the smallest, quietest smirk I could manage. "Guess you'll have to ask him." And with that, I walked away, no final hug, no tearful farewell, no swelling music in the background, just footsteps on pavement, soft and sure, fading into the distance while a door creaked closed behind me. Because sometimes the answer isn't in the words we say. Sometimes it's in what we choose to leave unsaid.